My wife is a serial cheater. As I watched my wife Amy, with whom I had lived with for 3 years, make out with a high society snob named, believe it or not, Reginald, whom she had dated before she married me, I rejoiced that I had done 2 smart things in the past. Now I needed to do something smart too. However, since I didn't have a camera, my cell phone was in for repair, I had just seen Reginald have sex with her, and Amy and I needed to be at her dad's house for dinner in less than an hour. I knew that by the time I got my camera out, the photo shoot would be over. However, since Reginald's car was blocking Amy's car, I could cause them some pain, get revenge, and still be smart. Putting on gloves, I quickly unscrewed the valves on 3 of his tires, deflated the air, and then reinstalled the valves. I took a rubber mallet from the garage and waited behind a bush. A few minutes later, Reginald hurried out of the house. As he knelt down by the right front tire, swearing, I discreetly hit him over the head with the rubber mallet. I didn't hit him hard enough to kill him, but hard enough to incapacitate him. I took the car keys out of Reginald's pocket and threw them as far into the woods near our house as I could. Since I'd been a center fielder in high school and 2 years of college, the keys went far enough away that they'd never be found. I pulled his credit cards, driver's license, and cash out of his wallet. You'd think a rich snob should carry more than $28 in cash, wouldn't you? I then wiped a small amount of hair, cloth, and blood off the mallet with a rag dipped in bleach, returned the mallet to the garage, and put the rag in a plastic bag. Joining the rag in the bag were credit cards and a driver's license. With plastic bag in hand, I ran to my car, which was parked a few hundred yards away so Reginald couldn't see it, and drove at high speed toward old daddy father-in-law's house. One of the few working payphones left in America was at the 7-Eleven store on my route. I parked outside the nearest store. I took off my jacket, put on an inconspicuous baseball cap, sweatshirt, and mirrored sunglasses, and then walked over to the phone. I gave a teenage girl coming out of Reginald's store $28 to call 911 to anonymously report a man lying in the driveway of 15 Ridgeway Terrace. I threw the plastic bag with the rag, credit cards, and driver's license into the dumpster outside the 7-Eleven. I then drove to Dear Daddy's house, arriving 10 minutes early. As you may have realized by now, I didn't like Daddy very much. He liked me, sort of, but only because I was the top producer at a large insurance firm he owned. That is, he liked the money I was bringing him. Dear Daddy, his name is Chester Grimes, was and still is a rich, pompous ass who always thought Amy was too good to marry a guy from a middle-class family like Blake Bristol, i.e., me. In fact, based on morals rather than money, I was too good for Amy and Chester. Chester valued promptness, so I called Amy on Chester's landline to find out why she didn't show up at the appointed time. When she picked up, she was anxious and upset. "Hi, Amy. Where are you? Your dad's a little cranky." "Oh, well, I'm sorry I'm late. There was a crime in front of our house and the police are here. Yes, officer, this is my husband, Blake. No, you don't need to talk to him, do you?" Some sort of argument was heard in the background, and apparently Amy covered the mouthpiece with her hand. Then came the sound of a tube being changed. "This is Detective Burns. Is this Blake Bristol?" "Yes, this is Officer. What's wrong? Is my wife okay?" "Yes, Mr. Bristol. Physically, she is fine. However, a man named Reginald Swifton was assaulted in your driveway. He was taken away in an ambulance and his car has just now been towed away." "What was Reginald Swifton doing in my house?" shouted I indignantly, and loud enough for the always confident Chester Grimes to surely hear. "Your wife hasn't explained it to us in detail. Perhaps you have some information to that effect?" "Why? He's her ex-boyfriend. Maybe he just dropped in for a minute. How should I know? I hope he beat the crap out of him, the asshole." "No need to devolve into vulgar language, Mr. Bristol. So you don't know anything about why he might have been in your house or who attacked him?" "No, but when you find this guy, tell him I'd like to buy him a beer. Can you take my wife to the hospital and swab her to prove Swifton's DNA is in her body?" "Not unless she agrees to it herself," Burns replied. "What if that was the use and she's afraid to tell you? Can't you make her go under those circumstances? Frantically, I asked. Unless she says she was abused, I'm sorry, but I can't, Burns replied. Can you at least take detailed photos to show if she was assaulted, such as bruising or bleeding? I pleaded. Yes, we can do that, Burns replied. Thank you. Detective Burns, would you mind putting the potential crime victim Amy back on the phone? Yes, although I'd like to talk to you again tomorrow. I'll have my phone back by then. Call me to make an appointment and I'll come to you, I told him, and then gave him my cell number. Hi, Blake, honey, Amy started to say. Cut the crap, Amy. I want you to go to the hospital right away. Have Detective Burns take you to get a swab and see if Reginald used you. No. Where did you get that idea, Blake? Well, then go and prove to me that you didn't have sex with him. How can you accuse me of cheating at a time like this? Amy started to cry. At what moment? The asshole was attacked. I don't care about him, and neither do you, I shouted, then paused for dramatic effect before continuing. Here's the deal, honey. Either you get swabbed while the police witness you before you clean yourself up, or I'll file for divorce. I won't do it, she shouted, but before she could say anything else, I hung up. Chester was ashy and pissed off. What was that? He growled. Well, Chet, I replied. He hated being called Chet. Your daughter cheated on me with that asshole Reginald Swifton, so I'm divorcing the cheater. When Chester recovered from the shock, he stammered, You can't talk to me or about my daughter like that. I have to fire you. The phone rang. I knew it was Amy, so I just picked it up and slammed it back down. Why don't you put it in writing? I asked excitedly, picking up a pen and pad from the kitchen table and holding it out to him. Even though it would break my heart to no longer be able to make money for a pompous asshole like you, I'll somehow survive getting fired. Chester stuttered some more, including mumbling about what a shameless ingrate I was and how happy he'd be to be rid of me, as he wrote, Blake Bristol is fired effective today, dated it, and signed his name. Thanks, asshole, I said, and walked out the door holding my pink slip in my hands, with the background music being the ringing phone. Okay, I know you're a little puzzled by my actions and think I might be nuts, but maybe a little more information will help clear things up. The two smart things I talked about in the first paragraph were the terms of the prenup I entered into with Amy, and the employment contract with Chester's company that was signed at the same time as the prenup. I humbled Amy and Chester by getting them to agree to add one provision to each of those contracts. I made the prenup reciprocal, meaning that if either of us physically harmed the other or had sex with anyone else during the marriage, the penalties in the prenup would come into effect. In my case, I would receive $500,000 from her trust fund before we split the remaining assets 50-50. In her case, she would receive 85% of the assets. If there are children, luckily we didn't have any when I saw Reginald bullying her, the party who was wronged would get custody. I've never even touched Amy in anger, and I've never cheated on her, despite the ample opportunity to do so. According to the employment contract, if I was fired or demoted, resulting in a 10% or more reduction in my earnings or duties, the non-competition provisions of the employment contract became null and void. I was not in the strongest position to divorce Amy for infidelity and get what I was owed under the prenuptial agreement because I had no photographs or records that could serve as conclusive proof. However, I had suspected her for a year and had gathered a significant amount of admissible evidence. That is, I had circumstantial evidence of her infidelity long before the Reginald incident. My friend and middle-class attorney Ron Botts told me that this circumstantial evidence gave me a good chance if we got the right judge, and that we could probably gather even more useful information during the investigation. Ron also advised me on what to do and what not to do if divorce is inevitable. I was advised not to close accounts, change money or securities, cancel credit cards, etc., until we receive an accounting and asset freeze order from the court. If acted upon hastily, it could reflect badly on the judge and hurt our case. As soon as I left Chester with steam coming out of his ears, I bought a cell phone and called Ron's office. "Why are you still there at 7 o'clock on a Friday night?" I asked. "Serving helpless assholes like you," he laughed back. "What's the matter?" I explained the situation to him, but only from the moment I got to Chester's house. Ron gave some straightforward advice. "Don't come home tonight. Go to the hotel, get the receipts, and get on the security cameras. Tomorrow morning, a private investigator with a video camera will escort you home and leave the recording device there. In the meantime, I'll check on Reginald. I'll start divorce proceedings on Monday." I did as commanded. The next morning, Saturday, the detective and I went to my house where the sex with Reginald had occurred. The detective went in the side door and I went in the front door. I made a noise and shouted, "Amy, I'm here to pick up some things and then leave." Amy quickly came down the stairs. "Why are you accusing me of cheating and getting my father to fire you, you asshole?" "Did you swab?" I asked wryly. "No," she started to yell before I interrupted her. "Then we have nothing to talk about. I'll get my clothes and leave." She was so focused on scolding me that I'm sure Amy didn't notice the detective. But he got good pictures and video of her face and exposed skin that didn't show any cuts or bruises. I closed and locked the bedroom door and, ignoring her banging and screaming, began packing clothes and valuables into 2 suitcases. I checked the sheets for stains, but she was smart enough to change them. She probably burned them or soaked them in bleach. After gathering my things, without a word, I walked past her and out the front door. I filmed her with a telephoto lens from the car as she screamed on the porch as I left. When Amy and I were upstairs, he set up a long battery life recorder in the kitchen. "How did the pictures and video turn out?" I asked as we pulled away. "Great. You can see there were no marks on it." The recorder setup turned out to be sheer genius. Later that day, we caught her talking to one of her friends, Lila Castle. Amy had Lila punch her in the face and hands, as well as inflict small cuts on her arms and neck. After Lila complied with Amy's request, they both went to the clinic to document the cuts and bruises and took pictures. While Amy and Lila were at the clinic, the private investigator and I went back to my house to pick up all the necessary items and the tape recorder. Ron called everything perfect. On Monday, we filed the adultery suit, and by the end of the week, Amy filed a countersuit for physical abuse. About the time Amy was served with the divorce papers on Monday, after cleaning up the office and picking up my cell phone from the repair shop, I went to see Detective Burns. "Where were you when this Reginald Swifton thing happened, Mr. Bristol?" was his first question after an exchange of pleasantries. "You seem to be treating me as a suspect," I said, crossing my arms. "We have evidence linking you to the crime scene," he continued. "Then you should arrest me because I'm sick of talking to you and I want an attorney," I said firmly. Of course, I knew he didn't have any evidence. "Do you really want to play it that way? You'll look guilty," Burns continued. "I thought that when I asked for a lawyer, you wouldn't be able to ask me any more questions. And you just did. Either arrest me or I'm leaving," I said. I stood up and started to walk out the door. "We'll be in touch," Burns continued without any brilliance. "Only with my lawyer," I said, handed him one of Ron's business cards, and walked out. I never heard from him again, and neither did Ron. I really wished, at the time of filing the lawsuit and countersuit, that I had known about Ron's conversation with another detective, Dan Drake, who was also a friend of Ron's. My anxiety would have been greatly alleviated, and I would have understood Ron's unwavering confidence in our case. The conversation between Ron and Dan took place 2 days after the countersuit was filed. Ron didn't tell me about it until after the trial. "Dan, I don't want you to tell me what you know, but I need answers to a couple questions." "Go ahead, Ron. If I can help, I will," Dan replied. "Dan, does the name Amy Bristol mean anything to you?" "Yes, it does." "Meh. Do you have any clients you've worked for that are interested in Amy Bristol's activities?" "Yes, there are, Ron." "Can you give me their names?" "I'll check with them and get back to you, Ron." Dan called Ron a few hours later. Their names are Elizabeth Moore and Jamie Watkins and... Don't tell me anything else, Dan. Would any of your clients want you to follow a divorce case involving Amy Bristol? Ha ha, okay, Ron. Yeah, I'm sure at least one of them will want to. I'll let you know the date, Dan. Thanks, Ron said. While this conversation was going on, I was apparently being interviewed by Chester's biggest competitor, who had hired me on the spot at the same salary as Chester's company and with commissions almost double. Since I didn't have a non-compete clause with Chester's company, I contacted all of my old clients within a week, and within a month, almost 90% of them had transferred to my new company. I could afford to pay Ron and the private investigators' bills. In addition, from the time the divorce proceedings began until the date of the trial, more than 80% of the times we met face-to-face, I won Chester's company some new business. When the divorce petition was filed, Ron filed a petition for an asset freeze. It was granted. Neither Amy nor I could touch my money, except for attorney's fees and other court costs, an allowance granted by the court, or as a result of a special request that the other party either agreed to or the court ordered. You couldn't cash out co-cards, cancel credit cards, transfer money from joint accounts to personal accounts, sell stocks, cancel insurance policies, or empty safe deposit boxes. The appointment of a judge seemed unfortunate, but Ron assured me that it would be to our benefit in the long run. Judge Matt Moore presided. He was the newest and youngest judge in family court. Very energetic, opinionated, and likable, with a suspicious bias against us. I met Matt Moore only once, at a 4th of July party at his neighbor's house, about a month before he was confirmed as a judge. I remember that Amy and I got into an argument that night because she got drunk and disappeared on me. Moore spoke very highly of my father-in-law, Chester Grimes, in a brief conversation that Moore and I had that evening. I asked Ron, "Why did we waive a jury trial if you suspect that because of his relationship with Chester Grimes, Moore is prejudiced against us?" Ron only smiled. "Who's the lawyer, you or me? I know what I'm doing. I want to get more from you than what the prenup stipulates," he replied confidently. Ron explained the pretrial procedure to me. At trial, we would have to disclose everything we knew and what we would use as evidence. The only exception was that if something would be used only for impeachment, that is, to test the credibility of a witness or party, we were not to disclose the evidence or the witnesses who would present it. Ron did not tell me about his conversation with Dan Drake, and he really didn't have any information that could be discovered from that conversation, so this was not disclosed to Amy's attorney, Amanda McAfee, during discovery. When we received from Amy's attorney the answers to the interrogatories that Amy gave under oath, it was not surprising that Lila Castle was listed as a witness to my alleged assault on Amy. The assault allegedly occurred the Saturday after the Reginald incident, when the discreet detective and I went to my house to get my things. Ron immediately called attention to Lila's testimony before we had to respond to Amy's requests for information. The videotape of Lila's deposition, which both Amy and I attended although we never spoke to each other, was on Monday. After Ron dusted Lila off for the date of the alleged attack, he pronounced, "So, Ms. Castle, you are absolutely certain that you witnessed the attack shortly before you accompanied Mrs. Bristol to the clinic for treatment that Saturday, correct?" "Yes, I'm sure," she said, trying to sound confident but not succeeding. "You didn't inflict the wounds on Mrs. Bristol yourself, did you?" continued Ron. Lila and Amy's jaws dropped, and Amanda McAfee looked puzzled. "Of course not," Lila replied hesitantly. "Now I'm going to play you an audio tape that an independent witness swore was recorded that Saturday after Mr. Bristol left his house. Tell me if you recognize the voices." As Ron played the tape, the faces of everyone sitting on the other side of the table turned ashy. When the tape ended, Ron asked, "Do you recognize the voices? Weren't you and Mrs. Bristol talking about how to give her bruises and then lie that Mr. Bristol did it?" You must have faked it, Lila sobbed. We'll have a voice expert compare your voice in today's deposition to the voice on the tape, and then we'll send the case to the district attorney for perjury charges. Those are all the questions I have. Not surprisingly, Amy's attorney had no answers. 2 days after Lila's deposition, Amanda McAfee filed a motion to withdraw the counterclaim and asked the court to issue an order of conciliation to stay the case for 2 months while the parties sought a certified conciliation mediator. Ron vigorously opposed this motion. During oral argument, he stated, "Your Honor, they filed the counterclaim in bad faith, and we want to be able to reflect that on the record during trial because it affects Mrs. Bristol's credibility. In addition, my client has not the slightest interest in reconciliation, and while the case is suspended, he loses interest in the $500,000 he is going to recover from Mrs. Bristol." Demonstrating his bias, Judge Moore granted Amy's motion, but in doing so, threw us a bone. If the reconciliation fails and Mr. Bristol wins the trial, Mrs. Bristol will pay 2 months' interest at 4% per annum on any money to which Mr. Bristol is entitled after the property is divided. Ron warned me to follow the instructions in the order during the reconciliation proceedings so as not to give the court any reason to sanction me. He told me not to swear, no matter how great the temptation. "Is the word cheater a swear word?" I asked him. "No, but don't use it. Call her a grossly unfaithful spouse," Ron replied with a smile. Not surprisingly, 2 days before the scheduled mediation session, I received a letter from Chester Grimes. I refused to answer his phone calls or even listen to his messages. The letter was very conciliatory and offered me my old job back with double my salary and commission. I kept it in case Ron could use it as evidence, but never responded to it. No lawyers were allowed at the mediation, only the parties. Amy came to the mediation dressed to the hilt. She is an attractive, sensual woman, and her closet, makeup, and hair were impeccable. If I didn't hate her, I would have gladly had sex with her. Since the order said nothing about uniforms, I showed up in cut-off jeans, sandals, and an old t-shirt from college modeled with holes. Amy hated that t-shirt and tried to throw it away twice. I also hadn't shaved in 2 days and my hair was uncombed and unwashed. Amy took one look at me and realized it was over, but she tried anyway, no doubt motivated only by the $500,000. "Mr. Bristol, I'm surprised at your appearance," the mediator said. "The order says nothing about dress uniforms, and I chose to appear as such. I apologize if that did not meet with your approval," I replied, trying to avoid a sarcastic tone, but apparently not succeeding. The mediator then moved on to the procedure, and Amy and I remained silent. Even though I was the complainant, she let Amy speak first. "As the complainant, don't I have the right to speak first?" I asked. "As a mediator, I can determine the order of the discussion," she replied, obviously still flustered by my appearance. Amy was a fine actress. She talked about how much she loved me and wondered why I suspected her. She talked about all the wonderful times we had spent together and cried when necessary for dramatic effect. It took a good half hour. Either the mediator was moved by Amy's ramblings, or he was trying to make amends, because as soon as Amy finished, she turned to me with misty eyes and said, "Mr. Bristol, what would you like to say to your dear wife who has just bared her soul?" "She's not a dear wife. She's a serial cheater, has blatantly cheated on me, and is also a liar, as clearly evidenced by her account of me beating her. Her whole presentation was a spectacle in an attempt to save $500,000. I don't know if she ever loved me, but I don't care. I don't love her. In fact, I hate her, and I want a divorce as soon as possible so I can move on with my life." The mediator and Amy were shocked. For the remainder of the session, I responded briefly to questions or reactions to statements from both the mediator and Amy. The only response of more than 4 words I gave in the rest of the session was when a crying Amy said, "You didn't even give me a chance to explain why Reginald was there before you went on a rampage. I told you then, take a swab to prove you didn't have sex with him or accuse him of using, and that if you didn't, I would divorce you. It was your choice. Accept it." This was not taken well. As a final, desperate gesture, the mediator said, "Mr. Bristol, I want you to stand up, walk over to Amy, and give her a hug to see if that awakens any feelings in you." I quickly replied, "I didn't see any requirement in the order that I have to hug her, and just the thought of touching my grossly unfaithful soon-to-be ex-wife gives me the creeps. Since I don't want to lose my breakfast, I refuse." Amy jumped up from her chair, started cursing at me as loudly as she could, and probably would have hit me if the mediator hadn't intervened. While the mediator was trying to calm Amy down, the big grin on my face probably wasn't helping, the mediator said, "You can go now, Mr. Bristol." The mediator told the court that there was no hope of reconciliation, so the court lifted the stay and the trial continued. During the trial, Amy's attorney took a deposition from me. I truthfully answered all but 2 of her questions. Those questions were, did you ever witness Mrs. Bristol having sex with another man prior to filing for divorce? And did you see Reginald Swifton in your home when you were married and prior to filing for divorce? Basically, I'm honest, but not stupid. After months of pre-trial proceedings, during which Judge Moore demonstrated his bias whenever possible while preserving the record for appeal, the trial was set for 2 months after the case closed. Ron did not take Amy's deposition. For strategic reasons, he told me. He did, however, have Amy's answers to questions in which she swore that she had never had sex with another man while she was married and before filing for divorce. At trial, we presented our circumstantial evidence of infidelity by 3 o'clock on the first day. Since we had enough evidence to resist the motion for a directed verdict, despite how biased Moore was, he knew it would be overturned on appeal if he granted it. It was now the defendant's turn to present her case. Amy's main witness, of course, was Amy herself. Under oath, Amy denied ever having sex with another man while married. Judge Moore looked a little uncomfortable at some points, but mostly he ate out of her hand and overruled almost all of Ron's objections. By the time she was done, it was almost 5 o'clock, and Judge Moore had ordered the trial to begin at 9 the next morning. As we were gathering our papers to leave, a guy with a big smile on his face walked up to Ron. When Ron saw him, he smiled back. I had seen this guy in the courtroom during Amy's testimony, but I didn't know who he was. "Blake, this is Dan Drake, a friend of mine," Ron said. I shook Drake's hand with a perplexed look on my face. "I have some information for you, Ron," Drake said, his grin getting even wider. "It concerns the impeachment of Amy Bristol's testimony." "Let's go to my office and order dinner," Ron muttered, and the 3 of us headed out. In Ron's office, Drake showed us one DVD that showed Amy having sex with James Watkins as he screamed her name. Drake said he had another DVD, but Ron forbade him from showing it to us. "I just want you to testify to the release date of your second DVD. If it's what I think it is, but I don't know for sure, I don't want to see it now, and I'm sure it will never be shown in court." Fast forward to 9 in the morning, Ron began his interrogation of Amy. After questioning her about Reginald's visit the day I witnessed him having sex with her, he asked, "Do you know a man named James Watkins?" "Yes," she replied hesitantly. "Is his wife Jamie Watkins?" "Yes." "When did you first meet him?" "I don't remember exactly." "Wasn't it at a party at your father's house 18 months ago when he attended it with his wife Jamie?" "Possibly. Didn't he move to town and start working for your father a month before that?" "I suppose so, yes." "Did he or didn't he? Do we need to call him or Mrs. Jamie Watkins to testify?" Ron growled, his pleasant expression suddenly gone. After an awkward pause, Amy stammered, "Yes, I remember now. It was at that party about 18 months ago that I first met him." "So you didn't meet him before you were married?" "No," replied Amy hesitantly. "Mrs. Bristol, did you ever have sex with Mr. James Watkins?" "No, no, you keep accusing me of cheating," Amy whimpered, then began to cry. Your Honor, at this time I would like to play the DVD. Due to its nature, I ask that it only be shown on the monitors at the counsel tables, the bench, and the witness stand, not on the main courtroom monitor. Very well, Mr. Botts. Bailiff, please press the proper buttons to make it happen, Judge Moore said. After a pause and a nod from the bailiff, Ron pressed the play button on the DVD player. Amy cried out and then covered her mouth with her hands when she saw what appeared on the screen. "Is that a video of you and Mr. Watkins having sex, Mrs. Bristol?" asked Ron after the video had scrolled for about 60 seconds. No, it's fake! Turn it off!" Amy sobbed. "No further questions, Your Honor. Unless there's a redirect, I'd like to call Dan Drake to the stand." "No redirects," Amanda McAfee said with a wince as Amy left the witness stand in tears. "I do have an objection, however. This video was not provided to us during the investigation and should not be used for any purpose. Actually, Your Honor, I didn't find out about it until around 7 o'clock last night, but that doesn't matter. The DVD and the testimony of Mr. Dan Drake, who will authenticate it, is only being used to fake Mrs. Bristol's testimony, not for any other purpose." Judge Moore felt uncomfortable, but she had no choice. "The objection is overruled. If authenticity is properly authenticated, I will allow the DVD to be used for impeachment purposes only." Dan Drake was a confident and calm witness. After Ron checked his qualifications, he authenticated the DVD, explained that he had shot the video at Mr. and Mrs. Watkins' home with the permission of his client, Mrs. Jamie Watkins, and that it showed James Watkins and Amy Bristol having sex while she was married to Blake Bristol and before the divorce petition was filed. Now Judge Moore looked extremely uncomfortable, especially when Ron asked Drake, "Do you have another video of Mrs. Bristol having sex with another married man while she was married to Mr. Bristol?" "Yes," Drake replied excitedly. "What is the date of this video, Mr. Drake?" "July 4th, 2012, Drake replied, looking directly at Judge Moore. Judge Moore interrupted him. "I need to meet with the lead attorney and the parties in my chambers right now." As we entered the office, the judge took off his robe and sat pensive. Finally, he spoke. "Miss McAfee, your client, Mrs. Bristol, appears to have perjured herself. I may be obliged to bring this to the attention of the district attorney and certainly comment if I write an opinion. I recess the court for 24 hours. I suggest we negotiate a settlement during that time." Amy looked down at the floor, and Amanda McAfee looked shocked but resigned. "If you don't, you won't like what happens next," Moore continued. "Unless someone has a compelling reason to present additional evidence, I'm ruling that the deposition in this case is dismissed. I will also entertain a motion that the record be sealed." By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Amy had written me a check for $500,000 plus interest, paid all of Ron's fees and disbursements, and signed a document agreeing to the divorce and transferring 60% of our assets to me, rather than the 50% as spelled out in the prenuptial agreement. That extra 10% was just my little extra. In return, we settled the prejudice case, promised not to bring Amy's perjury to the attention of the district attorney, and filed a joint divorce decree of irreconcilable differences, and the record was sealed. That same afternoon, Judge Moore anxiously approved the settlement agreement, granted the divorce, and sealed the record. When Ron, a few others from his office, Dan Drake, and, surprisingly, Jamie Watkins and I went out to dinner to celebrate that night, I whispered to Ron. "Why was Moore so insistent that the case be finalized and the record sealed?" "Of course, I know nothing about that," Ron grinned, "or else I, as an officer of the court, would have had to file a motion to recuse Moore and report him to the Ethics Commission. I'll bet he had a personal interest in this case, though," Ron said, his grin turning into a really good one. After thinking for a few seconds, I didn't ask any further questions. 4 months later, I read that Judge Matt Moore and his wife, Elizabeth Moore, had gotten a divorce because of irreconcilable differences. Details were not disclosed, but I noticed that Judge Moore drives a 5-year-old Ford around town, whereas when I met him at a 4th of July party in 2012, he was driving a new Mercedes. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.